Okay, well, welcome. I was looking forward to doing this in person, but there's some benefits to this format.
Well, it's
So
been
not this time for the library. It's a little bit harder being a presenter when you can't see the reaction. So if you're gonna fall asleep, you're safe and off we go. So pull up your buffs, get your $1.85 Chemistry 101 goggles, and off we go. So I'm reminded of a saying by Rich Mullins, who was a popular contemporary Christian music singer a couple decades ago, died in a traffic accident, but he admitted that one of his flaws was the envy of people who had not yet been to Africa. So this quote is from Rich. The only man I envy is the man who has not yet been to Africa, for he has so much to look forward to. So I am envious of you who haven't been, and we'll try to give you a taste of it this evening. So the question about traveling during a global pandemic is to go or not to go. So a couple of pieces of information I looked at in late August as we were kind of assessing the environment. We had just come back from Iceland, and they had been in the middle of the Delta spike, and CDC had made them a place not to go. And it turns out everybody's vaccinated there. Mask wearing is common. You couldn't walk 20 meters in a store without running into a hand sanitizer, and we felt very safe. Traveling, everybody is on pretty good behavior. So Kenya looks like it's far worse, but it has 53.77 million people instead of the 364,000 of Iceland. And the same with deaths. However, Kenya was barely testing, and Iceland was testing at 10,000 people a day out of that 364,000. So if you look at the percentage positives, Iceland was only getting a little bit over 2%. Kenya was at 10%. But so this was then Iceland, Kenya, and of course, a quote from Karen Blixen. For any of you who've seen Out of Africa, Karen Blixen was the character played by Meryl Streep. She lived in Africa for several decades before she went back to Denmark. She was a Danish heiress and had lost all of her money on her coffee plantation, but she's still widely very well thought of in Kenya. In fact, there's a whole neighborhood called the Karen District. And she said, perhaps he knew, as I did not, that the earth was made round so that we could not see too far down the road. So this is today and the reason for our Zoom meeting. So Iceland spike and Kenya sort of motoring along down here with almost no cases per million. Look pretty darn good compared to the current Omicron spike. So Munch Workshops, which is who we traveled with, adopted if it's CDC red, they're canceling. If it's not CDC red, the trip's on. So off we go. All the Iceland trips were canceled, but Kenya was a go. So Kenya is about 8,500 miles from Tulsa as the Great Circle routes, but no direct flights. So really the worst part of getting there is waiting in the airports at transfer. So we flew from Tulsa to O'Hare, to Frankfurt, and on to Nairobi. Some happy friends from New Hampshire en route texted us on their way. A quick reminder, as you guys begin to anticipate travel again, this is something we experienced. When you start traveling again, you will be out of practice. So you really have to think about what you need to do to safely travel and get there intact.
And like my Zoom meeting tonight, I was out of practice.
There you go. So we flew in over South Sudan, landed at Nairobi late one evening, and went shopping the next day in the Karen district. The delightful Mrs. Muller and one of the other people shopping there. And then, armed with our weapons of choice, off we go. And this is a picture at Kilimanjaro. The delightful Mrs. Muller with her iPhone 11 and me with my Sony, our weapons of choice. This is our motley crew. So we were a group of 7, and we traveled between the major destinations using Safari Link aircraft, usually with tanks with adequate amount of gas. One time, the 2 pilots, Mark and Randy, were sitting there in the seat behind the pilot, watching a gauge that they didn't feel particularly was appropriately full for the trip, but we made it. So this is what we're going to do. This is not going to be mostly a travelogue. It's going to be pictures and discussion, but this is where we're going to visit. We're going to go first to Elephant Pepper Camp, then back to Nairobi after several days, then up here to Lewa area, to the Nature Conservancy, to the Conservancy just north of Mount Kenya National Park, and finally down to the Tortillas Camp at Amboseli, which is also a national park just to the north of Mount Kilimanjaro. On the ground, we're going to travel with Toyota Land Cruisers, and we were populated such that everybody had their own seat if somebody sat up with the driver. This was our leader, Randy Hanna, who's a retired Army Special Forces kind of a guy, and quite a Africa expert. Most famous for PTB, push the button. And I found this quote by Theodore Roosevelt sort of telling about that philosophy. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. And we're always trying to do that as photographers. The worst thing you can do is nothing. So you can salvage a less than perfect picture if you've got it, but not if you haven't taken it. So push the button. This quote comes from a friend of mine who was working an area back when I was employed called Bivens Ranch, and he's reading the biography of that family that owned Bivens Ranch. Before you can get hit by the luck truck, you've got to get into the middle of the road. So pushing the button gets you in the game. So the advantage of going with somebody who's an expert on Africa, and in particular Randy, is he has great relationships with people throughout the areas that we traveled in. In fact, he's looking at investing in some land in the Amboseli area. So here's the staff at the Elephant Pepper Camp. There's no external fence around this, so Maasai warriors with their traditional spears and very bright flashlights escort you back to your tent at night. And they were delightful. This is our team: Bridget, Mark, Lisa, Mark, Jim, Randy, myself, and Claudette. So one of the advantages of traveling in a small group is, in this case, we went with a couple of friends who we knew previously, and we met some new delightful friends as well. So Claudette is emergency room head nurse at a Los Angeles hospital in the middle of the night shift. And so we were delighted to get this Merry Christmas from our new friend and her staff on Christmas Eve from Los Angeles. Another picture of the group and the Maasai warriors. So this dialogue happened relatively early on in our discussion. Our driver, Francis, said, "I love hyenas." To which Randy said, "I hate hyenas. You can't love hyenas." So Francis, being diplomatic, said, "I really like hyenas." And the point was that everything and everyone's contribution needs to be appreciated. So there aren't a whole lot of stinking carcasses from these tens and hundreds of dead animals that die inevitably in the Africa plains of the Serengeti, because the hyenas come and clean up everything except for the skulls. They crunch the bones, they get rid of the putrefying flesh, so they have a role too. Okay, a little bit more about relationships. For our first stop in Eliwana, or in Elephant Pepper, Francis and Goody were our drivers. Absolutely delightful, very well spoken, and they knew everything about all of the wildlife that we're going to be talking about. And they knew how to handle Randy as well. So a little bit about Goody. Goody is a Maasai elder. He grew up in a family where his father wasn't interested in him getting educated. Common fear that he would get educated and he would head off to parts unknown and leave the traditional lifestyle and the traditional village. So Goody began his professional career as a sheep herder, but decided that to really dream, he'd better lose a couple sheep. So he lost 7 sheep, was punished every day for the next 7 days. But the result was he was able to go and get an education and get a job. And 4 of those sheep were eventually found, but he bought his dad 6 sheep with his first paycheck once he came back educated and assumed his role within the Maasai population there. So common in 2022 is disinformation. And so we're driving along and Randy says, "Elephants don't sleep lying down, their weight would crush their lungs." So disinformation reigns even in remote East Africa. Probably 40 minutes later, we came upon this scene. All the elephants sleeping with a couple guards around the outside, and a couple more got up as we stopped, but they clearly were sleeping and were able to get up. So even in Africa, you can't believe everything that you are told. So why go to Africa as a photographer? Absolutely beautiful light. Here's the evening golden hour, a date at the scratching tree for these 2 common zebras. Morning golden hour, a couple of hartebeest juveniles sparring. And absolutely beautiful skies. The partly cloudy skies just radiate with these, what I like to call God beams that come shining down on different parts through the gaps in the clouds. Bright orange skies at dawn. Beautiful backdrop. Lovely acacia tree against the morning sun, or actually this is a sunset. More God beams. So absolutely marvelous. And in addition then, there's magnificent wildlife. These hippos are delightful to watch. They're actually the most deadly land mammal in Africa. And second, they seem relatively docile, but they can run at 19 miles per hour. And if you get between them and the water, or them and their children, Africans coming back from doing their wash at the river or whatever, the estimate is between 500 to 3,000 a year trampled or otherwise killed by hippos. Of course, the deadliest animal in Africa is a little teeny one, the mosquito, multiple diseases. More interesting wildlife, a bunch of mongoose watching a passing parade. Two types of zebra, the common zebra with the more widely spaced stripes and the Grebbe's zebra with the closer spacing, and both of them together in the top image on the right. People who've heard me speak on wildlife photography in the past know that I'm a big one on the eyes, and the eyes is a key to the relationship with the animal, but zebras are just pretty tempting even when you get shot from behind. Both white rhinoceros and black rhinoceros. And I love the relationships, and we'll see more of this, of various types of birds that have a symbiotic relationship, picking the insects off of the various animals, larger animals in Africa. And of course, giraffe. Lions, one resting up on a hill, one who can barely keep her eyes open. This happens to be a hippo that wandered into the wrong place, and lion pride was getting their fill until they could barely stand, and then poking through the grass 20 feet or so from our vehicle. So there may be something that's cuter than lion cubs. Have to do some things. I love this quote from Karen Blixen, out of Africa, heiress. You know you are truly alive when you're living among the lions. Maybe cheetah cubs. They're adorable as well, and they're fast as can be and love to romp and play. And all of the cats in Africa, the youthful ones, are practicing their hunting skills all the time on each other or anything else they can find. So one of the advantages of going on a photo safari is it's not just a checklist kind of a thing. We spent hours observing the behaviors of the various species that we were finding. And so we would see the whole spectrum of things, and we're going to see a couple stories a little bit later on that were sort of unique because we stayed in one place and watched what went on for a long period of time. So it's not just cheetahs check off to find the next animal. It's getting to know them and understand their behaviors. A lot of the plant life in Africa has these thorns, and a lot of the vegetarian, non-carnivorous animals like giraffes and hippos and other species that we're going to take a look at have found ways to deal with it, but the plants try. Family portrait. And a couple of much younger cheetahs. These are probably a couple weeks old. Recognize these guys from The Lion King, Pumbaa and his kids. And an animal that I was not familiar with, the gerenuk. Gerenuk means giraffe neck. This is an antelope, the male on the right and the female and a juvenile on the left. And again, dealing very effectively with these thorny plants. All right, next tip is there will be choices. In the end, it was the choice you made, and it doesn't matter how hard it was to make, it matters that you did. So choices in composition. You want to capture the scene as a whole with the God beams and the vehicle and the elephant. I want to capture the elephant. I want to capture a part of the elephant or the elephant's behaviors. So there's a place for all of these choices. Choice on exposure. Beautiful morning sun or morning sky, bright orange. If you expose for the sky, you get this lovely silhouette. If you expose for the animals, the sky's blown out, but you can see the animal behaviors. So choices to be made. Relationships. Fun to watch this giraffe came walking up the hill closer and closer and watched this family for a while. The 3 young cheetahs and the mom. And then turned and went about his day as the cheetahs played with each other, with mom watching. And the cheetahs in particular, well, all of the animals seemed almost oblivious to the vehicles and would walk up to this level of closeness or closer. And Lisa with a little iPhone video to capture the moment. Goody keeping an eye on where all 3 of the youngsters were. So another thing that is important to keep in mind is your relationship with the animals as well. So we're going to do a little optometry. Which do you like better? Which is more compelling, this or this? Or this? This or this? This or this? So in taking intimate wildlife photos, looking down is, I mean, you didn't have much choice in this case. She was walking right up to our vehicle, and there's a little bit of a relationship with the eye contact. In fact, I thought she was going to jump in and say hi. But when you're at their level, it takes away that looking down superiority. It's a much more relatable photo in many ways. So taking intimate photos, photographs taken at the level of or below your subjects are much more compelling and establish a relationship of equals. So a technique to master this or manage this, if it's safe to do so, and I don't want anybody going up to the tall grass prairie and doing this, but in Africa where the guides know the behavior of the elephants, getting low, even if it means getting on the ground, is a way to change the dynamics or the interaction of the photographer and the animal a little bit better. So I call this position the Dorizo, after Kathy and Richard, who we were up photographing eagles one time, and they kept talking about they would change the focus point with their nose sometimes on their Sonys with their touch screen. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. My focus point kept changing when I was lying on my side like this. And sure enough, it was the touch screen. So I had quickly turned that off once I figured it out. Thank you to Kathy and Richard for teaching me that lesson. So here's a picture of elephants in Amboseli taken from the vehicle. And here's a picture taken from ground level. And a series more. So much of Amboseli is a dry lake bed much of the year. So the elephants come out of the hills where they have vegetation and stuff to eat and head across this lake bed each day in groups to the water, where the water remains, to get the water they need before they head back to the hills in the evening. So a couple more ground level shots. So this cattle egret was very persistent. He would ride this elephant across the plains rather than fly each day. Got a diet of insects and a free ride. This guy checking me out, trying to decide friend or foe, I guess. Our friend the cattle egret again back there. So another way to change your position relative to a target is to use the terrain. So we would, if a cat was on the high ground, we would go to a little bit lower ground so that we were, of course, not going to get out of the vehicle, but we had a way to relate to the cat at its own level. So going down, you can play with the cheetah cubs or ponder what this little guy is thinking about. Or watch the mom as she kept a watchful eye on the cubs part of the time. I mean, the cubs have a lot of freedom and wander off, and mom will eventually go and find them. So here's the mom, and the cubs have wandered off 50 yards away, and she'll go retrieve them eventually. This guy, the terrain in this case happens to be provided by a hippo that wandered into the wrong patch of trees on the wrong day. So this was a fresh kill the day. And this guy too looks a little bit soporific or drunk or sleepy from his fill of hippo meat. Another way to establish this relationship is to back off a bit from the animals. If you can't get low, if you can't use the terrain to get on the level of the animals, backing off using a longer lens gives that appearance. It's a much lower angle from your perch in the vehicle out to the animals. So a 600 millimeter shot of the mother cheetah. Shot of a leopard. Leopards are the only cat in Africa that hunt and kill just for fun or just for practice. The others only do it when they need a meal. So you want to be particularly wary of a leopard. She kind of had her eyes on us when she wasn't sleeping off whatever she had eaten not too long ago. So 3 ways to get on the level with your subject of your photos. Go to a lower vantage point. Use the terrain to get below your subject, or back off and use a longer focal length. Another way to get a little bit more intimate is to zoom in on the details. So a couple of greve zebras munching on the grass, with a bunch of several yellow-billed oxpeckers on their back. White rhino munching down in a little valley with 2 red-billed oxpeckers having a conversation while they find insects on this rhino's face. So we made a puzzle of this and feel quite intimate with this particular guy from all the scratches on his horns and scratches on his face and wrinkles and crevices. So he's one of our favorites now. You can also zoom in on the details. So mother elephant and her young one, or framing the young one between the mom's 4 legs. Another way to get a more intimate feeling or relationship with your animals is if you're far away and you have done all you can with a long lens, you can crop to get a little bit more intimate. Or you can get close to something really big. It's hard to look down on or get a photo of a giraffe that you're superior to. You're always going to be below their level. You can see them again oblivious, or at least not impacted greatly by the thorny protection of the plants. So we spent some time up close and personal with the patriarch of the Ambacelli, Craig, who's 40 years old. And we'll get a look at his tusks in a bit. So we were fortunate to get an off-road pass, and we had an accompanying armed ranger. He was on duty, so we took him out on patrol, but it meant we could go off roads, which gave us the opportunity to encounter Craig. This is a video by the delightful Mrs. Muller to show how close we were. So great opportunity to get some very close-up pictures of one of the famous long-tusked elephants of the Ambacelli. I think it's important when you're traveling to photograph wildlife to also get some pictures of the context. So portraits are nice, but this lion not too far from the hippo kill, this male lion was lounging around, mostly sleeping. A lot of times with lots of flies on his face. But you can see the setting, this intermittent bushes, and the hippo had wandered into a patch of bushes or been chased and had been killed by the lions the night before. So don't forget to capture the settings or the context. So this is as gory as we'll get with regard to the hippo. And some cheetahs found some shade, a mother and two cubs under this lone bush up on this rocky hillside. So you have the picture of the mother and one of the cubs, but the context as well of where they were hiding out. So a couple of different techniques to sort of indicate the motion. This is an attempt at a slow shutter speed pan, 1/15 of a second, ISO 100, trying to get the head and shoulders and tusks stationary, but the blurring movement of the elephant as it goes tromping by. And one of the things that Randy would emphasize makes a good elephant, or probably almost any animal picture, is 4 legs and a tail is a pretty good start. So here's 4 feet and a tail. Zebra stomping his way across the dry Ambacelli lake bed. You can see the mirage in the background with zebras looking in the blurry background as though they're standing in water. They're not. Or hard to not get a feel for motion when you're photographing young cheetahs. You photograph at a fast shutter speed and they're really hauling. So as the elephants get close to the water, as they cross the dry lake bed, the tempo picks up. They're anxious to get there. So this is Bridget's video of them running to the water now that they're almost there. Oops. I have to force this. And a still image with the dust making it pretty clear these guys are motoring. And zebras happened to go running across a herd of elephants that were crossing the dry lake bed. Hard not to get the sense that the zebras are really motoring to get out of the way or get along their own path before the elephants get there. So there are choices to be made in editing as well. So go back to this one, lying on my side, the horizon is crooked. And one of the mantras that I've adopted is crop for impact. So I used to crop only 8x10 or 4x6 or whatever standard printing things are, but most of my pictures I don't print. I print a fair number, but most of them I don't. And so the Munch mantra is crop for impact. So, something like this, crop to something like that has more impact. You can probably crop a little bit more, but don't be bound by the conventions of 4x6 format or 8x10. So this guy, this is taken with a 24mm, so he's pretty close. And I missed him as I was readjusting my focus that my nose had done. Got it focused over at the side. So the original doesn't do much for you, but it's got 4 feet and a tail and the big tusks. So cropping for impact, you really get the feeling that this guy is proximal to your viewing position. Here's another example, fix the horizon and crop for impact. And usually my photos are quite journalistic. I seldom do anything to remove or take something out. In this case, I'm going to crop off the back elephant and I will remove this vehicle to give an image, something like that. So one of the main things that I hope to accomplish as a photographer with my photographs is to tell a compelling story. And sometimes this can be accomplished with a single photograph. Sometimes the full story requires the use of several photographs. So that picture of the zebras crossing in front of the elephants, I label it at the crossroads. Kind of like this quote from Brian Jackman, "Africa changes you forever like nowhere on earth. Once you have been there, you will never be the same. But how do you begin to describe its magic to someone who has never felt it? How can you explain the fascination of this vast, dusty continent whose oldest roads are elephant paths?" So a picture telling a story, a single picture. Water is life, Mount Kenya in the background in the Lewa area, and we watched a steady procession of many different types of animals coming down to this water hole. I think this one is pretty clear, back off. It tells the story with a single picture. To give you a little bit of context, it worked. The guy with the lower position backed off and made it clear he was going to be submissive to the big guy. Sometimes one photograph with context tells a story. So I don't have the perfect picture for this story because it didn't quite happen, fortunately. But if you ever see a black rhinoceros with its tail straight up like that, or even the young rhinoceros behind it with its tail straight out, that's time to start your vehicle and head for the hills. So it's hard to tell with rhinoceros in grass, but this guy's running full speed ahead toward the other vehicle. And you can see the exhaust, the vehicle speeding away. The rhinoceros probably wasn't going to stop. And here's the aftermath. They're all breathing a sigh of relief, looking over. The mom and child are hoping they've secured the perimeter, and we quickly departed. But interesting interlude where we probably were a little too close for the path that the rhinoceros happened to be choosing to take. So this is one that's near and dear to me. Push the limit and keep shooting. So I'm going to tell you a story here that's going to unfold over an hour and 10 hour and 15 minutes. And it got darker and darker and darker. So we're going to go back to the very beginning to tell this story. But I was in a vehicle with Bridget and I think Jim. And the other vehicle, Randy told them after a while, stop shooting, it's just too dark. I probably wouldn't have stopped anyways, but I didn't have to totally reject that. So I shot through the entire process. So we're gonna take a look at what the potential advantage of that. It's kind of the ultimate of push the button. So you wanna learn from others, but don't be afraid to make your own choices. So this is going to be a series that tells the initiation, welcome to the pride, a couple of very young lion cubs, a couple weeks old. And this is part way through the story, so we'll start at the beginning. Sometimes a series of pictures are useful to tell the story. So at about 4:55, we came upon this pride of lion, and there were several females up on a hill. Just kind of hanging out. And as we progressed around the area, found a couple of more females with some young cubs nearby, and they were lactating. And lions families or lion pride are all related females with a dominant male. And they're not at all choosy. They're all related. So if a cub wants to nurse and one of the other mothers has some milk, she is welcoming usually. So here we are. We've been on the scene for about 30 minutes now, or 20 minutes. And a couple of the young cubs, not the very young cubs, but a 3-month-old or so cubs up the hill began to come to life. Down at the bottom of the hill, about the same time, the very young cubs are looking up, wondering what these guys are up to, who they are. So a couple minutes later, the mom and the young cubs have a talk. And this is the context. So back to the context. A couple nursing cubs, couple of lounging, sleeping moms, couple of now interested young cubs, and the very young cubs and their mom down below. So the mom is resting. Cubs having a little pep talk, practicing their ferocity. So now we're 30 minutes in, mom's asleep, but not really. So I'm not sure whether she's grimacing, threatening, or something else that we'll talk about in a minute in this particular picture, but she looks up the hill. And not that much later, so now 40 minutes after we've been there, one of the young 3-month-old lion cubs starts down the hill. Stops part way, but before long, it comes over to see these young 2-week-old cubs. And soon is joined by several more, and they start sniffing around. The young cubs aren't quite sure what to make of it. So this 3-month-old cub makes a face like this, but it's not really roaring. This is what's called a Flamen response, which is for the German for the baring of the upper teeth. And it's to give access to an extra olfactory sensor further back in the mouth called the Jacobson's organ or the vomeronasal organ, which is used to detect pheromones and other more intricate portions of the smelling smells that they go. So you'll see in the field a lion walking along and it'll stop to sniff, and then it'll look like it's grimacing or smiling, but it's really accessing this additional olfactory nerves in the Jacobson's organ. So she's completing her Fleeman's response there, and they're beginning to talk about, what are these little cubs? Look how puny they are. So they decide to investigate a little bit further. The 2-week-old cub getting licked on one side, bit on the other. A little roar while the 3-month-old cub turns its attention to the other newborn. So now there are 5 or more of these 3-month-old cubs down there figuring out what's going on with these very young cubs that are new to the pride. So they're initiating the youngest ones to the pride, and mom's sleeping away. The 2 young cubs seeking solace with each other, but aren't quite sure what to make of it. So now we've been there for an hour, and they try to show they're ferocious as they're kind of getting bullied around here. The older cubs aren't really buying it. They're hopeful that mom will come to their rescue. Mom is snoozing away. And then mom decides this is getting way too busy here. So an hour after we've been there, and about 25 minutes after this initiation began, mom gets up, walks a little ways away, lays back down, and the initiation continues. Not so much to the delight of the young ones. And I didn't actually capture the moment, but somebody went a little bit too far, an hour and 10 minutes into the encounter, and the mom got up, came over, swatted this one 3-month-old cub. I caught the aftermath when it's snarling and the cub is making its mea culpa for whatever it was doing that offended the mom. And the cubs started to go back up the hill. The initiation continued a little bit down the hill with the young ones, and life got back to normal. So that's a case where, if you've been watching the statistics down here, I'm shooting a lot of these pictures at ISO 20,000, ISO 25,600, but I kept shooting to capture the story. And it's not a perfect story. You got a lot of grass blades in the way, etc. But it's something that our guides had never seen, the actual initiation of a younger cubs by some several-month-old cubs as they were welcomed into the pride. So here's another story I'd like to tell. So at the end of each day, we'd go, if we weren't too tired, and we'd stop somewhere and we'd have a beverage, either ginger beer or an adult beverage or whatever, and have a sundowner. So one day we went to the Mara River where the hippos are wallowing in the brown muddy waters. And about 20 minutes after we got there, we noticed that this herd or parade of giraffes was approaching the Mara River. We had seen them in beautiful light earlier in the afternoon, and we're delighted to see them coming down towards us, toward the river. So a bunch of zebras along as well, the birds taking flight. So down they come to the river, And at 5:40, the first feet go into the water. You can see the hippo in the foreground. And quite interestingly, they first sent out a young giraffe a couple of steps in, and once it was doing okay, then the leadership began to take over a little bit more. Hippo here, hippo to the right there, a couple hippos in the background. And off they go into the Mara River. Very tentatively though, and they left behind one solo giraffe to keep a watch on their backs as they began to decide how and whether to cross the river. You can also see African fish eagle watching the proceedings along with the hippos. Hippo decided they ought to take notice of him, which they did. You'll see one of these ubiquitous birds on the back of another hippo that's semi-submerged here. So they continue across, and you can see that the guard has now joined the troop or the parade of giraffes. So giraffes, when they're standing still, I'm told, are a tower of giraffes. When they're on the move, they're a parade of giraffes. So this crossing takes quite a while. I think takes 18 minutes or so. So I'm not sure whether it's a tower or a parade. See a bunch of hippos upstream, as well as the hippos in the faster flowing water closer to us. And then one of the giraffes slips a little bit, and I could just picture this as a bunch of dominoes going over. They were packed in so close, but fortunately nobody lost their footing. Oh, so I like this quote from Edward Weston: "The camera sees more than the eye, so why not make use of it?" And that's one of the things I really enjoy about photography is after the fact, when you're studying an image, you can see a lot of things that you may not have noticed at the time. This is particularly true in macro photography, or things that you can't see with your naked eye. So I think there are a total of, in the prior image, there are 4 or 5 hippos over here, 2 more here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're so focused on the giraffes that you barely notice that the hippos are right there in close proximity to them. We had also seen a couple of crocodiles the day before in the Mara River, which poses another hazard, although we did not see any associated with this crossing. So they near the far bank, a little bit uncertainty about what's going on as they approach that. So they again send out one of the junior giraffes to sort of be the guinea pig. And you can see again, we're shooting at reasonably high ISOs. And once it's been established that it's sort of safe, the biggest giraffe takes over again. And out they go. And so last feet out of this probably 80-yard wide crossing, 18 minutes after the first feet went in. And they proceeded through a gap in the riverbank on up the hill. So another story, water is life. So this big bull elephant was part of a group of elephants that were around this water hole, and he was just having the time of his life. Bathing himself in mud, rolling around in the muddy water. And if you don't think that water is life, or that it's important to them, just look at this guy worshiping at the water hole. So sort of the lesson of that I take away from both the lion shoot and what you're about to see is, regardless of a trip leader's or anybody else's bias or experience, you as a traveler need to make your own decisions, keep your own eyes open, and capture the photographic opportunities that delight you. So our guide wasn't a big bird guy. He didn't really have the time of day for birds. So what you're about to see are the forbidden fruit. And the moral is you don't always have to follow the herd. So a famous early photographer, Edward Weston, said, "I would say to any artist, don't be repressed in your work. Dare to experiment. Consider any urge. If it is in a new direction, all the better. Anything that excites me for any reason, I will photograph. Not searching for the unusual subject matter, but making the commonplace unusual." So we started to ask Goody and our other guides the names of some of the birds that we were seeing, and he kept talking about various kinds of bastards. And we thought, gosh, they really don't like birds either. But turned out, as I came back and researched some of the birds that I photographed, they were saying bustards, which are a variety of birds. So here's a Corey bustard. Some lesser flamingos, which great potential photo op. We really didn't spend much time with them, but in the morning sun, I have a friend who went to Africa shortly after we did and had just gorgeous pictures. This is the part of Amboseli Lake that happens to have a little bit of water. It's not very deep. You can see how the rest of the lake dries out so easily. But a lot of bird life over by the water. Spur-winged lapwing. I don't know whether this is said like the French, pied avosé or pied avosette, but a curved-beaked water bird. A heron and a Goliath heron. This guy is probably 6 feet or more tall. Crested cranes, some of my favorites from the Tulsa Zoo. Fun to see them out and about and flying around. Egyptian goose. Woolly-necked stork. Again, water attracts all sorts of things. We all need it. African yellow-billed storks coming in for a landing. White-fronted bee-eater. This particular photo stimulated a little bit of interest in birds for Randy, the leader. So we did a little bit of time searching for more bee-eaters. We could never get as close as we got. Here are some European bee-eaters that were up in trees nearby, but whenever we went to get a little bit closer, they found another tree. Our beloved cattle egret. Red-billed hornbill. You may recognize him as a character from The Lion King as well. And yellow-billed oxpeckers on these Cape buffalo. Gray-headed kingfisher. The national bird of Kenya, the lilac-breasted roller, absolutely gorgeous. Martial eagle, the largest bird in Africa with a huge wingspan, both an adult on the left and a juvenile on the right. The African fish eagle, not too dissimilar from our American bald eagle. I couldn't find a name for these guys, but they sure liked each other. They're not technically lovebirds, but they kind of were. And the bare-faced go-away bird. So named because its sound sounds like go away, go away. So traveling with small group is a lot of fun. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So we had a great time traveling together. This is a sundowner. I love this quote from Doris Lessing. Africa gives you the knowledge that man is a small creature amongst other creatures in a large landscape. So an acacia tree at sun, as the sun is going down through the clouds. So a couple of additional tips, more oriented toward the photographers in the midst. I like this quote from Ansel Adams. We tend to think that they got it perfect right at the start when they took the picture. But Ansel said, you don't take a photograph, you make it. So what did he mean by that? I always love pictures of Ansel Adams. He has the most delightful smile, sparkly eyes. So this is young Ansel. The famous picture, the moon over Hernandez. And an older, still with the same twinkle and smile, Ansel Adams, with two different versions of that print, printed from the same single negative. So in the film days, photographers, famous photographers, great photographers, would do a fair amount of dodging and burning to correct things that they thought should be lighter and to blot out some things they thought were too light. So Ansel Adams had this quote, dodging and burning are steps to take care of mistakes that God made in establishing tonal relationships. And some of these old photographers felt so strongly about this that only they could properly develop their negatives that Brett Weston, the son of Edward Reston, on his 80th birthday, 2 years before his death, surrounded by friends and family, tossed every one of his negatives into a brightly burning fireplace in his home. His feeling was that his photos were the print, not the negative, and he didn't want anyone else printing his work after he was gone. The prints are for posterity, not the negatives. I don't want students and teachers to print my work. So in modern day tools, the local adjustment tools in Lightroom would be the digital equivalent of dodging and burning in the darkroom. So we're going to take a quick walkthrough of how one might use these tools to salvage or to bring out points you want to make in a photograph. So we'll start with salvaging or semi-salvaging. And I don't remember whether this is so underexposed because I was exposing for the sky, or at one point on the trip, my auto ISO accidentally got set so that it had a top of 3200, which is way below my threshold. But anyway, there's this image. Throw it in the garbage heap or see what you can make of it. Dave's rule, it's okay to try to salvage an image in post-processing. So I'm just going to show you how one might go about that. First thing is when you brighten it up, so I've pulled it up almost the equivalent of 3 stops of light. So that would be 6400, that'd be approaching 25,600 ISO. So there's a lot of noise when you pull that dark picture up. So you can deal with the noise in a tool called Topaz Denoise, and there are other ways, but it clarifies the image a bunch. Here's another example. I'm going to use the Lightroom local adjustment tools, which are accessed with this circle up in the upper right over here. And I want to expose properly for the sky and bring out the zebras and the foreground. So little Topaz Denoise to get rid of the noise. Attempt at highlighting the zebras. Clean it up a little bit with a brush. And I brighten them up a little bit. And then you can deal with the sky separately from the foreground. So I'm going to bring up the picture of the whole foreground, and then I'm going to back off a little bit on the sky. So this picture that was almost totally dark, this is a different one from the first example where I had to pull it up from pure darkness, but it's not a photo I'm going to trot out and display anywhere, but it now tells the story that was intended when I took it, of a bright orange sky and two zebras walking up on the plateau. Another example here where I've made 3 quick masks using the Lightroom local adjustment tool. So I've handled the sky separately from the zebras, separately from the foreground. And one of the rules of photography, or one of the rules of visualizing something, is your eyes go to the bright area. So I've pulled up a little bit the brightness of the zebras relative to what the camera was able to depict in its raw format. So the equivalent of burning a little bit in the days of the dark room. And this one, down on the ground, so I've got my crooked horizon, so that's got to be straightened, but I didn't want to lose the sky and Kilimanjaro in the background as evening set in on the Amboseli Plains. So using several of the things that we've talked about here, I've flattened the horizon, I'm cropping for impact, and I'm using local adjustment tools to be able to image both the elephants, the foreground, and the mountain and the sky as we end a trip to the Amboseli region. So, as we said before from Brian Jackman, Africa changes you forever like nowhere on earth. Once you have been there, you will never be the same. And it's very difficult to describe the experience, but I hope you've gotten a little bit of a feel for the magic that is Africa and the fun of going on a photo trip with several delightful and like-minded friends. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill. Thank you, Bill.